Oh, okay. So first of all, later
Good
on we'll take a
morning.
photo, so we'll see who's here. I see that Georgie, you have a very nice background. Okay. But we'll take a photo down the road. Okay. And I want to welcome today's speaker, uh, who is Ilana Sherrington-Hoffman. She is, yeah, she's with us, Ilana. Okay, she is a very bright, intelligent mother of two, soon to be three. Mother's Day, happy Mother's Day.
Happy
Uh, and
Mother's Day.
and very seasoned speaker about all issues regarding Israel and Israel's standing in the world and how Israel is perceived. She is the director of something in Stand With Us, okay? And operations and international something, okay? Don't get me on the point. Uh, right, and she is lovely, and she holds a master's in conflict resolution, if I'm correct, and a bachelor in international relationship and communication. And all in all, she will be an absolute delight to hear for the coming hour, or even more if we can get her to stand a little bit longer. And so that we will hear her talking about the subject, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end, which I'm sure will be a fascinating one. So I see that we're getting there. So guys, I'll ask if you don't mind to open your microphone so the group picture gets, is nice later on. So if you're, if it's not too embarrassing, I can move, change to my pajamas if it will help others. No.
You do
No,
that.
I
You
don't
do
need.
that.
If I open this shirt, you'll see the big S, here. So, and I don't have the phone booth here with me to change to get it done quickly. So that's that.
Don't open my shirt.
No. Come on, guys. We have a guest here. Behave, please. Okay. So, Ilana, is that good for a picture?
I think so. If there's anyone else who wants to open up their video and they're not shy, please join us. Nobody is in their pristine condition anyway.
What do you mean? That's my pristine condition, man. You know that. Okay, it doesn't get any better than this. Okay.
I hope not, because you're way too cute.
No, Ilana knows me. It should not be held against her, but she knows me for quite some time. So it might be even used to my sense of humor, if you can call it that.
And can I tell them the secret of how I know you?
Listen,
Please,
you can tell them.
please.
Anyone wants to guess, they would guess right. Anyone wants to guess?
Yes, it is.
She's your cousin.
Oh yeah, my wife's cousin. Okay, roughly. Her husband is my wife's cousin. I'm not, to be blamed for having such a giftful family. People are gifted right and left. So I bring them. Okay, but they happen to be best at what they do. So again, I always say it should not be held against them that they're my family. So okay.
All right,
Okay.
so I'm going to take a group picture really quickly, just so I can have a memento from this wondrous occasion. So all of you put your best smile on your faces. Let's say cheese. 1, 2, 3.
Guess so.
Elvis.
That's fantastic. Okay, I think we're ready to go. Is that okay, Netanel?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, fantastic. So Netanel is just gonna mute all of you just for the duration of the first part of the
Just for
presentation.
the fun of hearing only myself and you. Yeah. Okay. Just a moment. I muted everybody, and now I've unmuted you, Ilana. So go ahead.
Okay, perfect. You have so much power in your hands.
Yeah, listen, that's the reason I left high school and joined teaching online 11 years ago is because I have mute buttons and expel buttons. You know, that's much better than high school.
It's really fun. So for the first part of the presentation, I think we will be doing kind of like a run through. I want to get through a briefing with you, which really describes Israel's image around the world, how it's perceived in different places, and also why it's perceived in that way. What are the different things that influence Israel's image? What are the challenges that Israel faces today in terms of, you know, reputation, image, and so forth? And a little bit about the different factors that influence that image and what can be done about that. So for the first part of the presentation is going to be a bit more like briefing style. Save your questions for the end, because I would absolutely love to get questions from you, and I'm happy to answer anything and everything with all the open honesty that I can. So make sure that you do keep those questions. I will give an opportunity at the end, I promise. I have made this presentation shorter than it usually runs for, because I understand that everybody is extremely busy during lockdown. They have so much going on. No, just because I understand that Zoom is not exactly the most, I would say, friendly kind of platform sometimes, and it's hard to kind of concentrate, and it's very difficult to be muted for so long. So I'll keep it as short as I can in terms of the briefing, and then open it up for questions, which of course Netanel will moderate. Just before I begin, I want to thank Netanel for hosting me here today. I think he spoke about the talented people that he knows, but he's a talented person himself. And it's amazing to see this group that he's put together and all these different people tuning in from around the world. I could hear the different accents as I was just setting up my audio. So it's really great that you guys are here together to listen, to hear of all these different perspectives and different topics. I understand you haven't really had anything about this topic before, so I'm happy to do kind of like a basic introduction, and of course to answer any questions that you have, no matter how silly you may think that they are. So a little bit about myself before I do a screen share and I show you the presentation and the different content that we're going to discuss today. So my name is Ilana, just like Netanel said. I live in Jerusalem currently, and I have 2 kids. One very, very soon will be added to the bunch. So I apologize in advance if there are any interruptions from family. Netanel told me this is a very understanding and loving group, so that you would have a lot of sympathy for me if that happened. It's just that exactly that transition time of when they should be asleep but might not be. So we'll see how we go with that.
Ilana, I should say that I was teaching Jean. Jean is with us, and I was teaching Jean when Noah got into labor with Kfir. And she said, "I'm a midwife, let me come." But all the way from Zimbabwe, you know, I didn't know if she would make it on time. That's the true story.
Right. Okay, so as I said, I'm from Jerusalem. I was born and raised in Israel, and I know that's confusing because it's like, hang on, doesn't she have a bit of an accent? So that's actually because of my parents, who both are originally from the UK, and they made Aliyah, meaning emigrated to Israel about 30-something years ago. They got married in Israel, they had all the kids, they stuck them with the accent. So often people don't believe me that I'm a Sabra or a born and raised Israeli, as they say, but I promise you that I am. I've never lived elsewhere. And I grew up in the Israeli system. I went into the army when I was 18. It was something that was very, very important to me because I understood the importance of safeguarding Israel because of my family's history. I have a very mixed background. On the one hand, mostly European history. I have a great-grandfather who managed to escape from Poland just before the Holocaust broke out, and he was one of the only people to survive from his family. The rest were murdered in concentration camps. And on a very completely different continent, my grandfather is originally from Iraq, which is, again, a completely different continent, but with the very same persecution because he was a Jew. He went through something called the Farhud, which was in 1941 a very massive and aggressive massacre against the Jewish population. It was because the Baghdadi authorities at the time were Nazi sympathizers. So as you can see, there was a huge issue with persecution that both sides of my family experienced, but eventually both sides happened to go to the UK first for one generation and then ended up coming to Israel. So I grew up on those stories. I heard all about those different things. And I said, okay, you know, Israel is important. We need to have an Israel. We also need to maintain it and safeguard it. And my army service was really what made me understand the importance of that. I was an officer for 4 years in the IDF, and I would always be with a combat unit in charge of the welfare of the soldiers. I would see what was going on with an operation or whatever it was. And then minutes afterwards, I would read in the international news and say, ugh, there's like zero connection between what just happened and what was just written online or whatever it was. And it was very frustrating to me. So as a student, I already volunteered for this fantastic organization called StandWithUs, which is an international Israel education organization that stands up for Israel and fights anti-Semitism, which unfortunately are often linked, as we will also see in the presentation. I started off by volunteering, and a few years later, after really getting involved, I was hired. I came to Jerusalem and opened up our education center, which is really in a wonderful location on King David Street. When you are next allowed to get on a flight and you can come to Israel, then I invite you all to come. Right now, we'll have to be happy and satisfied with meeting virtually. But that education center hosts 20,000 people from around the world every single year. And that's just the people that can come to our center. That doesn't include all the groups that we go out to teach, whether it's in the north or the south or whatever it is. So that's a little bit about me. And I want to do a little bit of a screen share. Just bear with me for a second. And I will start a little bit with briefing you guys about Israel's image around the world. So let's make that full screen. Okay, just give it a second. There we go. Okay, so let's dive straight into it. Hang on, let's see if I can still see your faces as I present this. Okay. Okay, got it. All right. So Israel's image around the world is StandWithUs. The first thing that I want to show you is a clip that we did, and hopefully the sound will work. If not, I will be able to give you a summary of what it was. But this is actually a comedian that we sent. Let's have a little bit of fun before we dive into the, deep, dark, and heavy stuff. A comedian that we sent to one of the most well-known campuses, ranked one of the highest in America. It's called UCLA. Maybe some of you went there and are alumni of that university, but it's pretty well known, has a good reputation. And we told him to go around campus and ask students all different things about Israel and the Middle East. So these are people that are not necessarily very involved in Israel, very aware of things that are going on. And these are the interesting answers that they had to some of the questions. So let's see if you guys can hear, and Netanel will let me know if there's a problem. Okay, so let's try through YouTube. That might be a little bit easier.
We can hear you.
Hi there, this is Mark Schiff for Stand With Us. And today we're on the campus of UCLA, and we're talking to the kids that go here to find out what they know about Israel. And I think you'd be very shocked to find out how much they do know and how much they don't know. So we're going to ask you a couple of questions about the Middle East. Do you know anything about it at all?
So.
What is the only democracy in the Middle East? Is it Iran, Lebanon, Israel, or Syria? The only democracy.
Iran, I guess.
Nope.
Iran.
Right. I didn't know any of the answers either.
I'm going to guess Lebanon.
Right.
I think I'm going to say Syria.
Syria. It's a good country, Syria.
Yeah.
Turkey?
Turkey.
Turkey? Turkey? Okay. Talking about Turkey, Thanksgiving is coming, so we love turkey.
So that means I was wrong.
Yes, it was Israel there.
Okay.
Yes. You're from one of the, like we said, the biggest Muslim country in the world. How many Muslim countries are there in the world? 10, 23, 43, or 56?
Try and count them.
That would be, we'd run out of film.
Majority Muslim population.
Majority Muslim population, like in Indonesia.
23. 23?
It's more than that.
23.
I'm going to go with 23.
23. 43.
You only got two more to guess.
53.
It's 56.
56.
And how many Jewish countries are in the world? 1, 6, 13, or 20? 1,
Jewish
6,
countries in the world.
13, or 20?
7.
7. Yeah. Huh? That's all right.
13.
13.
I'm gonna say 6.
15.
15 Jewish countries. Yeah, there's a lot of, especially in this area, you have a tremendous amount of Jewish people. That's true. How long have Arab Palestinians considered themselves a people?
I would say 1,000 years.
How long has there been a Jewish presence in the land of Israel, you think?
I would guess 75.
75 years. Absolutely, the Jews have been there for 75 years. What is Hamas? Do you know what it is? Is it a type of spread or dip? Is it a humanitarian aid group, a new music group that's coming up now, or a terrorist group?
Type of dip.
Dip. Yeah, you like Middle Eastern food?
Music group?
Yeah, they definitely, absolutely, Hamas does play music. There's no doubt about it. They're sort of, working things out, but maybe one day they'll be big.
Hummus?
Yeah.
The food?
Yeah, the food.
I don't know exactly what it is, but I love it, and you can do it with pita bread, and I think it's really good.
My favorite olives, and it's just
Yeah,
unbelievable.
it's really good.
Unbelievable.
Why are you so anti-Hamas? I mean, isn't pita bread the real enemy?
Hummus has nothing to do with Hamas. It's a food, okay? We eat it, they eat it.
It's vegetarian, it's healthy, it's beans.
Well, do you both agree on that?
We both agree that hummus is very healthy.
So we're making progress.
Just like you, I'm shocked to find out what they did know and what they don't know. But one thing for sure that I found is we have a lot of work to do to get these people to understand exactly what we're about. So thank you very much, and see you again soon. You want to teach?
No, actually I want to go into international relations.
Yeah.
I want to do something with like the United Nations, maybe be a diplomat to a different country or something like that.
الكتاب الابيض في حل فراغ بعدين يا علي
So it's actually a little bit of a shame that you guys are all muted, because you should see the that some of your faces have shown. It has been absolutely.
Ilana, there is a bit of a background noise.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. I'm going to ask your indulgence on two things. It's allergy season, so I have a real hard time during
Ilana,
this time of the year.
Yeah, I know. For some reason, it's hiding the X, so I've just stopped the video, and that's going to be good enough. Okay, let's go back to the presentation. So I've really had some great reactions from the crowd. Again, I couldn't hear you laughing, but I could see you laughing, so that was really fun. As you can see, there's a lot of confusion going on in terms of how many Jewish states there are in the world, or what, how long the Jewish presence has been here in this area. And of course, a little bit of confusion about what Hamas is all about. So yes, it's a little bit of a music group. They do actually put out some pretty catchy songs. And also, yes, I guess it's a little bit similar to hummus, which is a fantastic dip, but definitely not what Hamas is all about. So it's just interesting to see that really a lot of people have an opinion about Israel, but don't necessarily know much about Israel and don't necessarily know all of the facts. So it's first of all very, very important to understand that people don't necessarily know a lot about Israel. Yet, once again, that doesn't mean that they can't form an opinion. So I want you to look at the next slide. These are public opinion polls that were done by all different bodies and institutions. And it's interesting to see some of these different results. So as you can see, there was something done in an American survey, which I guess the results shouldn't surprise us too much. 61% for this public opinion poll of Americans support coming to the military defense of Israel if it strikes Iranian nuclear facilities and Iran retaliates. Okay, interesting. Then we get to Germany, and there's a public opinion poll by one of the most famous papers there called Der Stern. 49% of Germans view Israel as an aggressive country. That's starting to be a statistic that's a little bit more surprising. In something that was conducted in the European Commission, so this is for European Union countries, 59% of Europeans believe that Israel is the greatest threat to world peace. So that's Israel ranked as number one. And then something conducted by the BBC, but globally for all countries around the world, 56% global believe Israel has a negative influence on the world, Israel number one and Iran number two. So I guess that kind of leads to the last public opinion poll, which is pretty obvious. 91%, I guess that's really a conclusion we should have reached a long time ago. 91% of Israelis believe that their country has an image problem. I don't know what happened to the other 9%. Maybe they're taking a little bit of time to wake up. But I think in the recent, I would say, probably decade, Israel has woken up to the fact that the reputational battlefield or everything to do with image is not just something that, it's like, okay, people don't like us, that's fine. They've understood that political isolation can be extremely dangerous. Public opinion is vital for the legitimacy and continuation of a country, and it's one of the strategic threats that every country might face. So if its legitimacy to exist is being put into question, that can be very, very problematic, and we'll continue to build upon that as we go on. I'm not going to show you this video just for sake of time, but this is another sort of survey or research that was conducted actually by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They did focus groups of people, and what they did was they asked them to take different countries and try to symbolize them as the house. So for instance, if they were taking Italy, describe Italy as a house, they said, oh, it's a wonderful warm environment, there's wine, there's pasta, there's spaghetti. Try to think of the things that you would be triggered to think of if I asked you how you would imagine Italy as a house. When it came to Israel, it was a different kind of perspective. They spoke a lot about concrete and barbed wire and a very intense kind of atmosphere inside. Maybe it was a one-story bunker, someone said. Some people said they wouldn't feel safe to be in that house for different reasons, if they're not religious enough, or if they have a skin color of a certain type. And all of these different interesting things that they said, which, on the one hand, some of these were not so far from the truth. If you speak about, for instance, the fact that Israel does have strategic threats that it faces and is very security oriented. So yeah, maybe the concrete makes sense and maybe the fence makes sense. But a lot of the other things didn't. And also in general, if you would ask an Israeli like myself or Netanel, how they would describe their country, there would be so many other things that would come into play. Some of the things that you've heard in some of the previous talks, right? Israel is so vibrant, it's so diverse, there are so many different aspects. Why is there absolutely no discussion of, startup nation or humanitarian aid to the world, or even just the diversity and the multiculturalism, even the food, like the music, whatever it is. There's so many different things that are actually well known around the world, but for some reason did not even make the cut when it came to these focus groups and the way they were describing the houses. Now, it's important to note, these are not anti-Israel groups. This was the focus group. This was a random selection. Some of them may be more critical of Israel. Some may be more supportive of Israel. It's a mix. Okay, it really isn't one kind of orientation, but still the final result is very, very far from what some of us would describe Israel as, or at least it's definitely not the full picture. It's a very specific view of Israel. And that's something that's very problematic, because obviously if you're talking about a country's image, you'd like to think that there's a balanced picture and a wider perspective of what's going on, but that's not exactly what we're seeing. if we think in general, if I'm a person around the world and I know nothing about Israel, I have no connection, I have no people that I know that are from Israel or Israelis that I could ask, then how would I, in today's world, form my opinion of the country? What are the main sources of information that I would turn to? So for most people, at least maybe I would hope in this group, the first one would be the media, right? The media is just the way to get the news. That's where you get your information from. But the second, and something that's becoming more dominant, and unfortunately in this younger generation, and I think it's going to only get worse, it's becoming the dominant source of information, social media, rather than listening to the news. The mainstream classic media is becoming almost obsolete to that generation, and they're just gaining their information from all these different platforms. So this is interesting. You know, these are two sources of information that you would use in order to form your opinion, therefore the image that you have of Israel or of anything around the world. But these two sources of information, because they're not firsthand, are actually very flawed, inherently flawed. Let's start with speaking about the media, right? About the classic news. What's wrong with the media? You're all like saying tons of things now in your head already, because you know what's wrong with the media, right? Even without going too deep into conspiracy theories, but just looking very, very basically, there's always something to do with an agenda. It's very easy for us to say, this source of information is going to be telling us that kind of news, and that one's going to say the opposite. Why do we know that? Because there is some kind of inherent bias. The people who control the media stations, if they have, you know, the funds, if they're the people that fund the different platforms, then obviously they're going to have a say on the content that makes the cut and even the framing that the different things will receive. But even a very, very superficial reason of why the media is going to be very problematic when it comes to reporting about Israel. And once again, I haven't gone into any conspiracy theories. I'm going to be completely factual here, okay? Israel. If I was a journalist now and I wanted to report from a conflict zone, I would come to Israel. How easy would it be for me to be in the center of everything that was happening and to gain all of the information? Well, in case you weren't exactly sure, I'll tell you how easy it is. You would just come to Israel on a regular flight. There's so many corporations with tons of different flight companies that you could use. It's very easy to get here. Then you would have at least 4 different government agencies who would be falling over themselves just to give you the information. It's a democracy. There's freedom of press and freedom of expression and opinion. So that's fine. You can say literally anything you want and people will be happy to give you their opinion. They won't be scared of anything. There's no censorship. And then just in terms of location, you could be down near the Gaza border and be reporting. Maybe even Hamas would be happy to let you in because they have a fantastic PR network which they use, and you'd be able to go there and say, this is me live from the conflict zone, from the marches on the fence on the border, or from here live from a terror tunnel, whatever it is. And then an hour later, where could you be? On the beach in Tel Aviv, enjoying a nice cold beer or juice, whatever you're into. So it really is, if I can use this word on the Zoom, I hope Netanel doesn't get annoyed at me, but it really is the sexiest conflict zone to report from. It is, it's so easy, it's so accessible, and it also explains why there's so much information coming out of Israel, despite it being such a tiny country. And also, even if you just looked at the numbers, like casualties, okay, the amount of people that have been killed on both sides in this conflict from its beginning, from when Israel was established, even though you would say the conflict had started way before. But if I were to count the casualties from 1948 up until now, I wouldn't come close. I wouldn't get to a fraction to some of the things that have happened around the world or are happening around the world, the genocides, the civil wars. Let's compare that to just a few hours north of Israel, Syria. Anybody here know what's happening in Syria? Well, we know a little bit more now, but we definitely don't know enough. If I were a journalist trying to report from a conflict zone, I would have trouble. I'd be putting my life in literal danger. Nobody would be coming around to help me and give me information and express what they want to say. it would be extremely, extremely life-threatening for me to even be there. And that is one of the very superficial reasons why we don't know much about what's going on. So obviously there's not a lot of content to be put out there. So even for that superficial reason, we're getting a disproportionate amount of information about Israel coming to us through the classic media, which creates a situation where even if I knew nothing about Israel and the situation, just the amount of times I've been hearing Israel, 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 but in a negative context, because it's the media and they're trying to say what's extraordinary, right? What's out of the ordinary, what's abnormal, because that's what brings the ratings. They're not going to say, today was a great day in Israel, nothing happened at all, the sun was shining. So if I'm hearing this Israel, Israel, Israel in a negative context and a lot, then I'm going to just subconsciously have some kind of negative image when it comes to Israel. That's just the media. That's one source of information. What about social media? Well, that's pretty easy to understand as well. As we know today, fake news has been made possible because of social media, where at least in the media there was fact-checking and some kind of accountability. Here there's absolutely nothing. Everybody can post whatever they want, when they want, and will not have to back it up whatsoever. It can be easily manipulated. It's amazing to see how different things and trends like the ice bucket challenge or whatever it was, if you follow social media, you've probably come across it, and that's because one image can easily sway the whole platform. So anyone can write anything, you can post a picture and not explain where it comes from. Nobody's going to fact check and make sure it actually comes from where you said it came from. And that's how easily you can manipulate the information, especially if you're able to put up a very emotional picture that's going to pull on people's heartstrings, and you don't have the accountability to have to give the whole view and the whole perspective and the whole picture and the context within which this picture or this photo was taken. So these two platforms, these two sources of information where we get our information, if we don't have someone to talk to, like a Netanel here in Israel, if we just have to form our opinion based on these two, detached kind of platforms, then it's not surprising that a lot of people are going to have at least a semi-negative opinion of Israel, and that's a very, very difficult obstacle to overcome. That's just on the very, very basic level. In general, if we think about the world, we like to this is called the 595 rule, split it up into different groups. So there's the 5% on either side. What does that mean? 5% of the world who are very, very pro-Israel, okay? They love Israel. Nothing you say will ever sway them against Israel. They're the biggest cheerleaders and fantastic. And then there's the 5% on the other side, which are completely anti-Israel, okay? These are people who cannot be reasoned with, even if you show them something that completely disrupts what they thought in the beginning, right in front of their face with evidence. They will still not be swayed whatsoever because they have this hatred in their guts, okay? They're the complete polar opposite to the other 5%. And then in the middle, you have the 90%, which is kind of like the majority of the people. Some of you might ask, why is it 90%? That sounds like a lot. Well, the 90% is very diverse. Some of them might lean more towards a critical perspective of Israel. Some might lean more towards something that is slightly more anti. But the fact is that these are people that you can talk to. These are the majority of the people. There's place to make a dialogue. That's why those 5% are so small, because it really is the people that cannot be swayed in any other way. So if I was strategic, right, if I was a media advisor to the state of Israel, who would I be targeting in order to sway public opinion, to influence public opinion about Israel? Obviously, I'd go for the majority, which, as you can see, is the 90%. But that 90% has all of these inherent issues that we discussed in the beginning. First of all, the fact that most people just don't know much about Israel. Most people also don't care to know much about Israel. Israel might be something that is dear to my heart. Maybe it's dear to most of your hearts. But to most people in the world, they couldn't care less. They have their own priorities and their own lives to get through. So they're not going to go and start fact-checking and maybe criticizing and thinking, oh, I should be critically thinking when I'm getting this information from the media and social media. They'll just eat it all up as is with absolutely no, kind of qualms about that, because it's not something that concerns them. And also there's just this, the lack of information creates a vacuum, meaning anybody and anything can enter into that vacuum and fill that vacuum of information with whatever they want. So obviously, as you know, I come from an Israel education organization, so I myself am trying to fill that vacuum, right, with information, with education, with trying to give the facts on the ground, giving a broader perspective of what Israel is all about, opening the spectrum, having better dialogue, more balanced dialogue about what Israel is all about. But there are other factors that could also get into that vacuum and try to influence, and I want to talk about some of those. So look at some of these images. You're going to see some things that are a little bit more disturbing, but these are images of different organizations or bodies or entities that are trying to get into that vacuum of information of people who either don't know or don't care, and try to influence their hearts and their minds about Israel. And there are lots of different bodies and entities and institutions that do this, but there is one that really is, I would say, the top choir master of the anti-Israel approach. And that is an organization that perhaps many of you have heard of. Maybe you haven't heard of them, and that's fantastic. I hope you never do. But this is a very, very well-organized, well-funded, and very clear and concise narrative of being anti-Israel. And they are called the BDS movement, or the anti-Israel movement. BDS stands for Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions. Maybe some of you, this will be a little bit familiar, because there was one country that really suffered from a very, very, very concentrated effort of boycott, divestment, and sanctions in a way that hasn't really been seen since, and it doesn't exist today. And that is actually South Africa. During the apartheid regime, when we had this serious issue of the division between the races and the second-class citizens, and the apartheid laws against the Black communities in South Africa, the world, the way that they dealt with the situation was to politically isolate South Africa in order to influence it and to make it a pariah in the international arena until South African apartheid ceases to exist. Right? And that's exactly what happened. There was pressure, and eventually they couldn't take the pressure anymore, and apartheid, in essence at least, or legally, ended. So that sounds very familiar, because right now there's a campaign being pushed against only one country around the world, that no other country that is the target of this campaign, and is suffering from boycott, divestment, and sanctions in order to isolate that country and make it a pariah in the international arena. And what country is that? It is Israel. So the BDS movement uses words, images, and actions to spread misinformation and lies. Boycott activists try to delegitimize and demonize Israel and brand it as a pariah, as I said. What's interesting about this is Israel has always had different threats and strategic things to deal with. As we know, there were the wars, the symmetrical wars. This is Israeli army against the different countries that already from when it was existing, from the War of Independence, we see the different countries, the 5 armies that attacked Israel. And then there's, of course, the terrorism, was the asymmetrical warfare. This is guerrilla, this is the IDF or the state of Israel against something that is a terrorist organization and not a state entity. So those are the 2 traditionally strategic threats that Israel has always faced. But with the rise of technology, and with the fact that we can now use different things like the media, and especially social media, to influence people's opinions about a country and to create results like the success of pulling down South African apartheid, well, now there's another front line that Israel has to face, and that is the reputational battlefields, right? The one of the hearts and minds. And this is just public opinion, Okay, this is a war of public opinion. Two sides saying Israel is the worst thing in the world and Israel is the best thing in the world, or maybe some people in the middle that say something in between. But those are the two extremes. And that's a very, very difficult front line to face because it's all about legitimacy. And a country could be very strong with its military. It could be very strong against all different physical threats like bombs and tanks and whatever it is. But it's very, very difficult for you to be able to use that power and to be able to stand strong against these different strategic threats if you don't have that legitimacy. Legitimacy is what crumbles states, okay? What literally debilitates them from being able to do anything. And using that South African example, it's very, very obvious why this was something that was employed against Israel and where it came about. Because the BDS movement really started to become an entity and become a thing in something called the Durban Conference. Durban Conference was in South Africa. It was a host for international human rights through the United Nations, and they were supposed to discuss all the human rights issues around the world, but it very quickly became an Israel bashing international conference, and that's where they came up with the different parallels that they drew or tried to draw. This is where they came up with their strategy of saying, we need to start saying that Israel is an apartheid state, the last standing apartheid state, just like South Africa. And that is why we should employ boycott, divestment, and sanctions, because just like South African apartheid ceased to exist, we will create a reality where Israel will cease to exist. And where is the middle ground in that? Or why is that something that is very problematic? Because if you think about it, there are no tanks and bombs being employed here, right? There's no aggression, there's no violence. So maybe it's actually a good thing. Maybe this is the movement that is most peaceful, the most democratic. They are expressing their opinion on different platforms. They are trying to make people believe what they believe, which everybody has a right to do. So what's so wrong with this? Well, what's interesting to see is that not everybody is able to make that little distinction, but I want to point that distinction out to you because that is the crucial key to understanding what the problem with the BDS movement is. And that is the fact that they are not saying here, oh, you know, Israel has issues, Israel has problems, Israel has flaws. We disagree with XYZ policies. Israel needs to change said policies, and then everything will be fine. That's not what they're saying. What they're saying is Israel has no right to exist. It should cease to exist. And only when that happens, then justice will have been served. So what does that really show us? That this is not criticism that is legitimate. This is not constructive criticism. This is something that crosses the line and crosses the line to very far-reaching and very dark places. It could be just anti-Zionism, anti-Israel sentiment, hate speech, and very often it really goes far into anti-Semitism, which we'll see again. One of the easiest ways to see how the BDS movement is actually promoting, you know, a one-state solution where Israel doesn't exist is on a few levels. First of all, let's listen to the founders of the organization. Let's listen to the people that actually made this organization a thing and are the leaders and the people that run it. For instance, Omar Barghouti, which is one of the most well-known BDS leaders. And this is just one of his quotes. I am completely and categorically against binationalism because it assumes that there are two nations with equal moral claims to the land. That's just one of the lighter ones that is more confusing, that you kind of have to read 3 times before you really grasp what he's saying. Some are a little bit more blunt leaders that will say BDS is 3 words that mean the extinction of Israel. And when they say that, it's really, really just obvious kind of what their goal is. So how do not all the people in the world know that this is what they are saying? Well, they don't put it on their website. So many people will just go on the website and it looks super peaceful. It looks like, oh, you know, great, this is for Palestinian rights. This sounds fantastic. They're nonviolent. Let's join. But it is actually way easier than you think. Just do a quick Google search after this presentation, of course, of quotes by BDS leaders, and you'll see some very disturbing things that they have said about the true goal of what the organization is all about. Now, if that isn't enough for you, if you say, well, the leaders may say it, the people that founded the organization may say this, but I still don't believe that that is their true goal, I'm going to completely disregard that. Well, fine, let's look at their actions. Okay, look at the different things that they try to boycott, or the things that they try to divest from or sanction against. Okay, there are lots of different examples. These are just some of them. I'm going to minimize myself to just one example because of the lack of time. SodaStream, some of you are very familiar with this. Basically an Israeli company that makes soda. They're also very good for the environment because they mean that you're not using plastic bottles, you're using their reusable bottles. They're very green, very eco-friendly, and they make delicious soda. The issue with them was that they operated across something that is considered the Green Line, or the 1967 borders, or the 1949 Armistice Line. Lots of people refer it to different ways. I'm happy to talk about that at the end of the presentation if anybody wants more detail. But that kind of line, or whatever it is something that is the beginning of what is considered disputed territories, right? Some people consider it occupied territories. People refer to it the West Bank. People refer to it Judea and Samaria. It depends what their narrative is and what perspective they're coming from. But we're still talking about the same area. But let's, at least for now, for the most basic fundamental kind of concept of it, call it disputed territories, because there's definitely a dispute about those areas and what's going to happen in terms of resolving the conflict. And because they operated there, obviously there was a boycott against them by the BDS movement. And the pressure that was put upon the company eventually led to a situation where that company moved to a different place inside Israel proper. And that caused about 500 Palestinians to lose their jobs. You go to the spokesperson of the BDS movement, you ask him, this was caught on video, obviously, do you care? Do you have any feeling towards the fact that 500 Palestinians just lost their jobs? And not just that, they were getting full equal pay and rights, just like the Israelis that were working there. And that's not necessarily something that happens across the Palestinian Authority and the territories. And the spokesperson's response is, no, because the goal is much bigger than the measures, and that is that there should be no Israel. So it really doesn't matter if the Palestinians are harmed on the way. So all of a sudden it gets you to think about it, hang on a second, this is supposed to be an organization that speaks up for Palestinian rights. How do they not mind to trample upon Palestinian rights in order to achieve something that seems to be something completely else? And that's when you see that it's much more about, down with Israel, anti-Israel, than to be pro-Palestinian at all. Another thing that's very important to point out is the fact that this was almost like an island of coexistence and cooperation and peace between Israelis and Palestinians. And you'll see a lot of boycott attempts against those kind of things, even like a film festival where Palestinian directors and Israeli directors will come together to talk about film, nothing to do with politics. And yet still that will be boycotted. Why? Because what's the catch in these different situations? It's the normalization. It's the fact that the two sides are actually coming together, recognizing each other's right to exist, right to their opinion, and having some kind of dialogue. And that's not something that the BDS movement is interested in having, because that is normalization and therefore legitimization of Israel's existence. So once again, you can either look at what the founders and leaders say themselves, which is very easy to see, even though you think, oh, if it's so easy, why don't people know? Why don't people look? Because they don't bother to. It's not their priority to go digging and researching something that's not put out there on the website. And secondly, if that's not enough for you, you can just look at the actions and think, why would they boycott something like this if it actually has the larger goal of maybe creating dialogue and coexistence and some kind of cooperation between the two sides? So it's not something that is easily done. You do have to dig. You do have to really try to examine and be critical thinking. And that is not something that most people around the world have time to do, care to do, and they don't. So it's very important for people who are critical and are able to look deeper and dig deeper to make sure that these things are being put out there and said. Otherwise, there's just this whole real almost disruption of what people think the BDS movement really is and what they're really about. And another of the more disturbing things, this is really far-reaching, of if you were not convinced of why the BDS movement is a bad thing because of what the leaders and founders said, and if you were not convinced that the BDS movement is a bad thing because of them actually being against coexistence and cooperation, some kind of peace and dialogue, then maybe this will be a little bit more disturbing to you. And that's that the BDS movement is one of the biggest facilitators of anti-Semitism in modern times, or in today. And these are just some of the examples that you can see: drawing swastikas on the Jewish fraternities, or putting eviction notices only on the doors of the Jewish students, fake eviction notices. How did they know who was Jewish? Well, very simple. Some people have interesting answers to that, but the real answer was they looked at the student roster. They looked at the names. And that, unfortunately, is a tactic that was employed by Nazi Germany, when they would look at the names of people and say, oh, this person sounds Jewish, we won't allow them to leave the country. And that also led to worse things. So it gets pretty bad, especially when you look at Ohio University, where the president of the student senate decides to pour a bucket of fake blood over her head, which was supposed to emulate the ice bucket challenge, where people would pour a bucket of ice on top of their heads in order to raise awareness to ALS, to the disease, and to the research that should be raising money towards the research that should be conducted to fight that disease. She pours a bucket of fake blood over her head and says this is to protest the genocide of children in the Gaza Strip by Israel. How is this anti-Semitic? Ooh, hang on a second. Blood being poured over the head, saying something to do with children. It's basically bringing up things that may not be so foreign to you, especially if you're quite familiar with the history of anti-Semitism. It's the same thing coming back again. It's the classic blood libel against the Jews, and this is happening on campuses worldwide. These are just some examples from the US. I can show you other examples as well. For those three reasons, what the founders say, what the actions of the BDS movements do, and what it actually perpetuates and facilitates, those are three levels that the BDS movement employs that are very, very problematic and very disturbing. And to understand that, once again, this movement has access to the different platforms that people view in order to gain their opinion of Israel. And that is something that is really bothering. You know, it's a huge issue, that this vacuum of, once again, people who don't know or don't care so much, and they're being influenced, and there's this entity that's going into that vacuum. These are some disturbing scenes of things that are happening. This is mostly in South Africa, but also this actually started off in Canada and is being seen in more and more increasingly in different places in Europe, especially on campus. And this is called Israel Apartheid Week. What is this phenomenon? This is a whole week that is dedicated to just one country around the world. No other country gets a whole week dedicated to them every single year. Usually during the month of March, it's called Israel Apartheid Week. It's a week of street theater. You bring different students who are anti-Israel, you dress up, you put on different campaigns and different things that you try to push as the agenda. You try to be very, very provocative in your demonstrations, guest speakers that come onto campus, all funded by the BDS movement, but being funneled through the anti-Israel student groups on campus. And one of those, for instance, is the mock checkpoints, which you can see here at the top. People will be dressing up as Israeli soldiers, and others will be dressing up as Palestinians. And the Israeli soldiers will basically be seen as harassing and abusing the Palestinians, and also just students walking across campus. And then another one is called a die-in, which you can see at the bottom left. they will be basically saying 1, 2, 3, and everybody will pretend to be dead and hold up a sign with a name of a Palestinian that has lost their life during the time of this conflict. There's no fact check. We have no idea if some of these, if they were all completely innocent and lost their lives due to the conflict, which could very well be the case. But it is also very possible that some of these were part of the activities and maybe actually members of the different terrorist organizations or part of the active fighting. That's the whole point. This is street theater. There's no need to fact check. You can say what you want. You can do what you want. Another one is on the right at the bottom, the Israel Apartheid Wall. This is something you'll often see on Israel Apartheid Week. They'll basically construct a wall and say this is the concrete wall that runs from north to south in Israel, and it is basically to segregate between Class A and Class B, which is the Israelis and the Palestinians, and is there because of racial reasons. And of course, they will not discuss a few simple facts. One, that it was constructed for security, and that it is 99% successful, which is a very effective security measure that I would have any day. That it was constructed after something called the Second Intifada, which is a great rise in the wave of terrorism, where there were suicide bombings across Israel, buses, hotels, markets were being blown up, and Israeli civilian lives were being lost. And another thing is the fact that it's not actually made of concrete. In fact, less than 5% is made of concrete. Everything else is made out of a fence. It's called the security barrier. It's a fence that you can see from both sides across. And not only that, if a Palestinian has a claim to say that this security barrier is infringing upon his rights on his land or whatever it is, they have the right to appeal directly to the Israeli Supreme Court. And then different changes will be made in the way that this fence is constructed in order to accommodate that claim. So all of these different things, that's just a very, very quick briefing. But as you can see, these are not representative of the situation on the ground. If anything close to this happens, it is something that is immediately taken care of. It's a minority, it's a bad apple. It will be investigated and prosecuted within Israeli society, political system, or military system. And it's definitely not the whole picture or the full perspective. But this is something that is being put out there. And if I don't know much about Israel, I don't have any firsthand people to talk to about it, then it's going to have some kind of influence on me, because all I'm seeing is that negative. All I'm being exposed to is what these people are telling me that is very true and they're very passionate about. And I'm not going to go do the fact checking right now. I'm just going to say, okay, and probably not care much about it, but at least something would have stayed with me, because that's the only context within I'm hearing anything about Israel. And that's very, very problematic. When is criticism of Israel anti-Semitic? Well, we really try to teach this educational tool. It's called the 3Ds. This was actually created by Natan Sharansky, who's a pretty well-known Israeli. He was a former prisoner of Zion, which is somebody who grew up in the Soviet Union. Because of his Zionism beliefs and ideology, he was locked up in the Gulag for years, where he was tortured and beaten because he believed in, Israel and Israel's right to exist. And he knows what anti-Semitism is all about. He came up with the 3Ds. Why 3Ds? Also because each of these words starts with a D, but most importantly, what is 3D? It's some kind of glasses that you put in your eyes, and the minute you put them on your eyes, you see things in a different way, right? You see it in 3D, things are popping out at you. So that's what this is. This is to put these goggles on, these glasses on, look at the criticism of Israel, and it will help you see whether this is legitimate criticism, which is very, very important, especially in democracy. Like, we should really be encouraging constructive criticism. Israelis are very critical of themselves. Take a ride with a taxi cab driver. In Israel, you'll get a good dose of what criticism is all about. But what if it crosses the line, or when does it cross the line? And that's where the 3Ds come into play. So the first, and this, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, delegitimization, okay? Any kind of saying that has the underlying notion of the fact that the Jewish state has no right to exist. It has different forms, different ways you can put it. But if what you're saying is that not this policy should change, this is something that has to be different, we need to end, you know, this kind of part of the political system or regime. But what you are saying is that this got nothing to do with something specific, the whole state needs to go. That's where we're talking about delegitimization. That's where we have a problem. Another is double standards. Okay, if Israel is held to a higher moral level than any other country in the world. And then lastly is demonization. And that's where the things that we can see a little bit more of the anti-Semitic kind of sentiments, because this is distortions and lies depicting Israel as the worst thing in the world. You'll start to see rhetoric and mostly images that are really, really disturbing, because they have come upon us not just in Nazi Germany, which is the more recent cycle, but also way before that, okay? We're talking about medieval times and the blood libels. And it's the same image of the Jew, the hungry, greedy Jew with the hooked nose and the rats and wanting all of the money and all these horrible, horrible anti-Semitic imaging and rhetoric that has been around for hundreds of years and is coming up against this time. It is under the cloud or under the auspices of the Jewish state. This time, oh, no, I'm not anti-Semitic. I'm only criticizing the state of Israel. Okay, that might be true. And if that's the case, then fine. Your criticism is legitimate. But if you're employing delegitimization, if you're employing double standards, and if you're using demonization, we're not talking about constructive criticism. You're not just criticizing the state of Israel. You're going way further than that towards hate speech. And as I said, very often it can result in anti-Semitism as well. These are just a few examples of, for instance, demonization and different things that you can see. These are real images. They have been widespread and put all over, especially on social media, but in rallies and demonstrations. And as you can see, I wouldn't exactly call them constructive criticism. Just a few things to keep this really real and valid, okay? If you think this has happened like 5 or 10 years ago, no, this is still happening today, and I want to make it really impactful. This is happening even when everybody is in lockdown. So this is my coronavirus update for you guys. I made this especially for you. Anti-Semitism and all of these aggressive attacks have not ceased, are still happening all across the world. Even during coronavirus, in New Haven, a synagogue was vandalized. A synagogue in northern Russia was damaged in an arson attack. In Alabama, 2 synagogues were vandalized with swastikas. Germany's anti-Semitism commissioner says there are direct links between the current spread of the coronavirus and that of anti-Semitism. Jewish virtual meetings, which just like the one we're doing right now, not necessarily Jewish in this context, but anything that was seen either as Jewish or pro-Israel was, as they call it, it's a new notion, Zoom bombed by anti-Semites who would try to basically put in anti-Semitic images or even pictures of Hitler and basically just try to disrupt whatever was going on. And in general, anti-Semitism under coronavirus, we have statistics of over 40% of Jewish youth in Europe want to leave because of rising anti-Semitism in their country, and an 18% spike in violent anti-Semitism incidents worldwide in 2019, which is kind of like a summary of the year that just passed. So those are the anti-Semitic aggressive attacks that are still taking place. And I just heard of a recent one where there was an attack on an old age home for Jewish people. I don't have the image yet because it's just being investigated, but this is something that is ongoing. What's worse is, for instance, Miss Hitler 2020 contest. Hope none of you have ever heard of this before, but apparently it's been going on for a few years now, because you can see the winners of Miss Hitler competition from 2017 to 18 to 19. All you have to do is basically sign up, send an image of yourself, with a nickname, write a few words about why you are the best Miss Hitler, and then you can win, which is very, very disturbing. And lastly, specifically with the coronavirus, okay? So look at the different things that you can see across social media when it talks about the fact, what is the real virus plaguing our world? And it's talking about the Jews, not corona. You can see anti-Semitism in the US rising, the FBI director saying, we are experiencing horrific incidents of anti-Semitism. Now more than ever, we have to stand against it. A Spanish BDS group saying that Israel was sending Israeli doctors to the Palestinians in order to deliberately infect them with coronavirus. Look at the image they used, by the way. That very same image has nothing to do with the context that they spoke about. It's an Israeli policeman who went to help one of the wardens who was in an Israeli prison and was attacked by a prisoner, and he's going to comfort him and see that he's okay. Absolutely nothing to do with the context that they said. It's a complete lie, or very softly you would say fake news, but it's a complete lie. There was in Illinois, there were demonstrations against the lockdown of the coronavirus, against the governor saying that there should be a lockdown. And all of a sudden you see these signs, Albach macht frei. This is what you can see on Auschwitz. Okay, this is going back to, you know, the Jews and the concentration camps. What has that got to do with protesting the lockdown in Illinois? I have no idea, but it's raising its ugly head. You can see the portrayal of the Jews as rats. And the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, he says he calls for an all-out effort to end the tsunami of hate and anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that have been sparked by the coronavirus pandemic. Anti-Semitism in all its forms is absolutely unacceptable. So as you can see, not only has it not stopped, in a way it's also made this whole foundation for new conspiracy theories, anti-Semitic sentiment and rhetoric to be spread around the world, which is very, very disturbing, where actually the truth is very far from that, and a lot of good things are actually happening, especially in the Israel aspect when it comes to coronavirus. Very, very shortly, I'd like to end with a little bit about Stand With Us. This will take me just a minute or so, and then I will be happy to open up to questions, because I know that a lot of you have been writing and have been waiting to ask them, and I'd be happy to take those questions. So Stand With Us and what we're all about, established in 2001, very close to that Durban conference that we spoke about, but really what made them say, okay, let's come together in the living room of Roz Rothstein, who's the founder of the organization, and say, let's build an organization that will be doing Israel education, be a resource for anybody who cares about, you know, having better dialogue and learning in a more balanced way about Israel. The straw that really broke the camel's back to say, let's create this, was in 2001, the murder of two 13-year-old boys, Kobe Mandel and Yosef Ishran, who decided they were going to leave their homes. Maybe some of you are familiar with this story. They were going to skip school and go and travel in a valley near their house. They were confronted by Palestinian terrorists who stoned them to death. And the murder was so brutal, they had to recognize the bodies or identify the bodies by their dental records and by DNA. And this is a horrific murder. Yet, when you saw the framing of this in the newspapers, this was specifically in the LA Times at the time, you would see that there was a very specific focus, and that was where the boys lived. And yes, the boys lived in a place called Tkoa, which is considered a settlement or a community which is over the Green Line, the 67 borders, the 49 armistice line, as I said, in the disputed territories, West Bank, Judea and Samaria, whatever you want to call it, really doesn't matter. Why does it not matter? Because it is, yes, it's disputed territories. But do 13-year-old boys have any sway over where their parents decide that they're going to live? Absolutely not. Do 13-year-old boys have the ability to influence government policies in Israel about anything, especially towards disputed territories? Absolutely not. They're 13. They don't even have voting rights yet. So there's no place for blaming the victim here. This should have been condemned universally, and it was not. And that was really what they decided to say, okay, we have to create an organization, we have to do something about this. And since then, we have grown to activity across 5 continents. Okay, and that activity is with thousands of people from around the world who are either volunteers or part of our different programs. And the main goal is really telling Israel's story from the indigenous roots to the history of dispossession and oppression, and then finally to the liberation, the creation of the modern state of Israel, and that sort of development that has been happening for the past 72 years. Happy birthday to Israel. We recently had a birthday. And what does Stand With Us do? Just in a few images, lots and lots of different things. We host incoming delegations, which can be influencers. This could be anything from YouTube bloggers to cooks to chefs to lawyers to whatever it is, people who have a huge following, so they can then later influence the people that they have in their circles. But we also send outgoing delegations of young Israelis who will have conversation and encourage dialogue and have people asking them questions about the reality in Israel. We have the Education Center in Jerusalem where we host 20,000 people, as I said, every year in the center, and that excludes the groups we go out to. Presentations from something like what I just did now to things that are much more complex, like history and current events and answering tough questions and how to be active for Israel, how to tell your personal story. We train people from the age of high school to students, to even adults and community members on how to be, the most articulate and fantastic ambassadors of Israel that they can be. We create resources and materials and booklets and digital content online. Even just our social media following is absolutely astounding. 105 million weekly peak reach. That's 105 million people around the world. So some people say, aren't you just talking to the Jews or the people who obviously are very pro-Israel? I say, I wish there were 105 million Jews around the world, but there are not. And these are some of our statistics. And even in the very recent pandemic, okay, things that are going now, we had to stop working from the office. So what did we do? Let's really vamp up our ability to be online. And we introduced something called Stand With Us Connect, which is our digital platform. These are the numbers. So over 150,000 people reached on weekly Stand With Us Connect programs and webinars, and our social media reach was over 28 million people reached on social media during April 2020. I'm not talking about a year, I'm not talking about half a year, I'm talking about the period of a month. These are the statistics and our ability to reach people, which I know that I said a lot of disturbing things in this presentation and things that you say, what am I going to do about this? This seems hopeless. There's so much against us. Well, there are a lot of lights at the end of the tunnel, and there are positive things, and there are people out there doing things about this and taking a stand and not just letting it slide. And to really leave you with a hopeful kind of tone and not just to bring you down, we're also seeing the fruits of these actions and winds of change. Head of Sudan Sovereignty Council, which is one of the leaders of Sudan, is quoted to say, Israel is not our enemy. This is a very public statement, and it's by a leader of a country which is at least classically or traditionally been a huge enemy to Israel. In the United Arab Emirates, the ambassador to the United Nations of the UAE has said within the most public forum possible in the United Nations, I congratulate the Israeli scientists on finding a possible treatment against the coronavirus. It's exciting. We can cooperate. And lastly, as I said, we just celebrated our independence, our 72nd. The Arab world wishes Israel happy birthday. Stand With Us's social media pages, and specifically Facebook, we've received tens and tens of different wishes from different countries around the Arab world, where they put up their passport, as you can see there at the bottom, and write well wishes for the state of Israel on their 72nd birthday. So if you think about it, yes, there are a lot of strategic challenges that Israel faces. They are not easy at all, but you can do something about it. You can stand up. You can be part of the people that say, I will not just be silent about this. I will take a stand, and I will make a difference, and I will educate, and I will talk to the people at my work, at my environment. I will reach out to people digitally if I'm in lockdown, because as they say, all that is needed for evil to prevail is for good people to do nothing. So that is the end of the briefing part. I acknowledge the fact that it was long and intense. I know this is a lot of information to absorb, but it was absolutely fantastic to be able to give this over to you. You were an extremely fantastic audience. Everybody was so quiet and silent and listening to every word. But I would be happy to take questions now. So I'm going to hand over to Netanel to be able to facilitate that, and I'm happy to answer anything that anyone would like to ask.
Right. So first of all, the most exciting thing about Stand With Us, thank you very much, Ilana. I should thank you first of all. Yeah. And the most exciting thing that Stand With Us did during this Corona hiatus is to show Ilana reading stories to her daughter in Hebrew. So if you're if you want to see that, go on the Facebook page of or the website of Stand With Us. They have a lot of information about the history, the culture. They have like it's really a good place to start with everything you want to know about Israel. So that's that. I will make you know what we can do it either. I'll have you ask, or maybe I'll start with a tough question so you won't be hesitant to make Ilana's life a little bit harder. So Ilana, in 2018, Israel denied entrance from Omar Shakir, a Human Rights Watch director, for supporting the BDS movement. What do you think the price, how do you manage the international price of doing that? Because it is perceived by some as, you know what, he's got his opinions, and for having the opinions that he has, you didn't let him in. So what do you think about this predicament?
That is a fantastic question, because it has received a lot of backlash, and that is something that we deal with. I will say, first of all, it was a very controversial decision. Not 100% of Israelis actually agree with this decision that was made by the Israeli current government, under the Minister of Strategic Affairs at the time, who basically said, if you are a BDS activist, if you're part of the BDS movement, you will be denied entrance into Israel. So first of all, the first thing is that this was controversial and not everybody agreed with it. They said even if they have the worst opinions in the world, denying entrance is not the way to go, and this is not something they were on board of. Okay, this is a specific government and a very controversial decision. On the other hand, there was a distinction being made. It's not anybody who is critical of Israel should be denied entrance. They're talking specifically about the BDS movement. And I hope, at least from this presentation, that I was able to convey to you in the most basic terms why the BDS is very, very vastly different to just having criticism or being against a specific policy or whatever it is to do with the government, why there is something so problematic and disturbing with what they're spreading and what they're encouraging and what they're facilitating. So again, I can't say that I necessarily agree or disagree with the policy. There's a lot of backlash within Israel and with the international community. But right now, that's a decision that has been made. And this could change in the next government. You never know.
You never know, indeed. Carol, I saw your hand was up for a long time. So if you have a question, go ahead. Carol, you have to unmute the microphone. I can help you with that. Carol, can you hear me? Okay, maybe she went to get a cup of coffee or something. Okay, so if you have a question, guys, let's see your hand. Wayne, do you have a question? I see you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Hi, Elena. Thank you. Hi. Greetings from Singapore. Hi, everyone from.
3 a.m. Okay. So Wayne gets a question.
Yeah, it's 2 a.m.
Okay. Yeah.
It's 2 a.m. in Singapore right now. Anyway, I see that statistics slide you showed earlier on is more to like the Europe and in America. So is there any movement for like STEM university in Asia or in Southeast Asia? Because like Singapore and Israel, all our neighbors or surroundings are of similar nature. Nathaniel, we talked about this before. And so is there anything, like, because I travel to Malaysia and Indonesia, and I experience and I see things, and I see advertisements, you know, it's like the map of Israel is like, I mean, to their favor, I will not say it, yeah? So is there any way, like, education in Singapore, where StandWithUs will, you know, like, be planted here? Yeah.
That's a great question. So we started off being actually an American organization predominantly. We started out of Los Angeles, the story that I told you of, you know, setting up in someone's living room. And then what happened is that we slowly grew because of a need. But as every nonprofit, everything is based on donations. So we were able to expand, but because there were a lot of local support and donors who would say, oh, we really need this in this country and in this country, so therefore we're going to come and help you establish that. So that's how we've grown out, and we have activity across 5 continents. We do have already materials in different languages that are spoken in some of the Asian countries. For instance, some materials that are in Mandarin, some that are, I think, in Vietnamese. So we do have some activity, and we've worked with different people from different Asian countries within Israel when they have come here, but we don't have an established office or physical presence in Singapore or Malaysia and Indonesia, obviously. But again, so it's a consideration of a non-profit of being able to expand to where you can actually sustain yourself. But we still, if people reach out to us, we do what we can in order to help them and support them.
And I will be happy to connect you if you need anything. Wayne, I'll connect you to Ilana. Ilana will get you the guy in charge of Asia or
Fantastic. Thank you.
Right, Ilana? Can I ask you to do that? Thank you very much. So Carol, I see you're back with us. So let's hear your question.
Well, I don't really have a question, but Ilana, you really pushed my buttons here. Congratulations on a wonderful presentation. And the first thing that came to mind was Hosea's absolutely razor sharp observation: my people perish for lack of knowledge. And I see this going on in this country. I'm in the United States. I also carry 2 passports, by the way, so we're on the same team here. So no, it's what's happening here is just, it's heartbreaking, and I don't quite know what to do as a retired teacher. Anyway, also, I don't think most of us lost the observation that Mr. Baruti is doing an advanced degree at where? Tel Aviv
University, yeah.
Okay, so to me, this speaks to the power of the Israeli deep structure democratic, should I say, point of view, that this man, who in my view is committing sedition against the state of Israel, is allowed to speak what he speaks, organize what he organizes, and he's a free man. So I think that's a stunning support of what Israel really is all about. And I thank you once again for your presentation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, okay. So last 2 questions, Anthony and Surprise. So Anthony, go ahead.
Yes, thank you for a great presentation. When I'm listening, I have ideas, but it's a lot of it is above my head, and I'm wondering how effective have they actually been? Because obviously what you presented shows us clearly that they are very destructive. They're not thinking about the situation of the Palestinians, really. They're not trying to help the unity and the peace between the 2 communities or the communities. They are basically trying to destroy. I'm wondering, how effective have they really been, and where are they now? I hear now and then reports that they have a big setback in Germany because some court turned them down, and they have a set. How effective are they? What are they accomplishing? Oh, can't hear. Can I hear? Can you hear?
Yeah. We've heard the question, Ilana.
Can't hear Ilana.
Ilana?
You're muted.
Ilana,
We can't hear Ilana, Mr. Barak.
No, I cannot hear Ilana. I'll call her. I'll let her know that we cannot hear her. Yeah. Just a second. I'll just let her know that we cannot hear her.
We can hear your phone ring.
Right. אילנה, אנחנו לא שומעים אותך.
I just don't know what the issue is.
Okay.
You can speak now and they'll hear you through my computer.
Okay, wow, that's very innovative.
Oh.
So that's also a really good question. And that's because their effectivity is something that is really hard to gauge. On the one hand, it's not like they're destroying Israel's economy by the boycott of the sanctions. We have a very strong economy. There's nothing like that's an immediate physical threat. But on the other hand, when you look, for instance, at the United Nations, which is the legal entity that governs the international arena, you'll see the amount of condemnation and resolutions that are coming out that are anti-Israel in relation to the ones that are coming out for all the rest of the world. It's completely disproportionate, and that is something that is very, very disturbing. Another thing is you also look at things that are happening recently. If you're familiar with the International Criminal Court, okay, which is the ICC, they're the prosecutor of the ICC who decided they want to investigate Israel for war crimes. She has decided that she is now going to recognize Palestine as a state, despite the fact that there's no negotiations or no haven't met the qualifying conditions to become a state, at least yet. And definitely there's been no peace resolution in order to facilitate that kind of reality. And she is going to now one-sidedly decide to investigate Israel for war crimes, which is very damaging. And so we're thinking about the fact that, again, it's not an economic kind of problem, but it really is political isolation. And when you have political isolation, as I said, that can lead to very catastrophic things. We're talking about public opinion that is also being swayed against Israel more and more so. Yes, on the political level, there has been great work being done. A lot of European countries and the US, of course, and the UK recently as well. A lot of things that have to do with BDS have been outlawed or have been banned because that we were able to make the case and show how there's anti-Semitism involved and it's not legitimate criticism, but just the fact that there's some kind of political resolution doesn't mean that the people on the ground think the same thing, which is very, very disturbing. And once again, if this is what the political arena is saying, then why doesn't that translate when it comes to the United Nations? Where are these countries when they can veto or stand up or vote against all these resolutions that are coming out against Israel? So it's complex. There are things for both sides. It's unclear to say where exactly it's getting to. But I can tell you that if you do nothing and you don't stand up to these things that are happening and are very real, then it's just going to get worse.
That's great.
Okay,
I'm not sure there's time.
I just wanna have last question for someone who whose country was brought up as part of the discussion, and that is South Africa. So surprise, you will have our last question. Go ahead.
Yes, my question is similar to Wayne's question. That is this Stand With Us? Do you have that organization in South Africa or not? And how can someone get involved with that group of Stand With Us as well? Thanks.
That is also a great question. I'm also actively trying to see if there's anything I can change with my audio settings, but I have no idea why we just left me for some reason, but I can't see anything yet. So in South Africa, we don't have a physical office, so we have a fantastic presence where we work with organizations on the ground. So I was working with student organizations, because unfortunately South Africa really is almost a ground zero for the BDS. There's a lot of activity going on there, a lot of problematic, very aggressive campaigns, especially on campus, where Jewish or pro-Israel students in general are being really intimidated and harassed for their pro-Israel views. We send a delegation every year. We bring educators across to them to give them different trainings and presentations. But I will also say that there are South African groups that have been our allies. For instance, one called DEISI, which is DEISI, and they are a Christian group that is pro-Israel because of the Christian mandate to stand up for Israel. They have also been an ally for us, and they are fantastic. So there are different local groups that you could join. In South Africa, so once again, we're not necessarily with an established physical office, but we do have a lot of activity there, especially educational work, and there are groups on the ground that are being active and that have been really partners for us in our activity in South Africa.
So thank you very much, Ilana, again. Thank you again. And we have taken so much of your time anyway, so thank you very much. And it's a pleasure having you here. And others would not be able to hear you so well, probably. So we thank you again, and thank you for coming. Thank you for educating us about representing Israel and the BDS movement and the 3D glasses that we have to put on whenever we hear these claims against Israel. And again, thank you. A little bit of housekeeping for the rest of the week, guys. Tomorrow we have Rabbi Dr. Moshe Rat, who is an expert on Judaism, general philosophy, and fantasy literature. He is kind of a popular Facebook rabbi, and he wrote something about vampires today, which got him into a bit of a heated discussion. We'll see if we can talk with him about it tomorrow. On Tuesday, we'll have former Knesset member Yehuda Glick joining us, the most well-known ginger in Israeli politics. And also the luckiest guy, as the last name suggests, Glick, in German luck. He was shot 4 times in the chest and survived to share his experience. So there you go, a lucky guy. Wednesday we'll have Professor Emmanuel Tov continuing our discussion of textual criticism of the Hebrew Bible, and specifically starting to talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls. And on Thursday you will have yours truly continuing to talk about the Proto-Semitic and the characteristics of the Semitic languages, which will be at least 2 lectures, I would guess. We've talked about where, when, and stuff like that last time. We'll get into a little bit of the nitty-gritty this Thursday. So that's the plan. And thank you, Ilana, again. And goodbye, guys.
Nathan.
Thank you so much.
Yes, Minonet, do you have a quick question that you...
Your uncle, when is he coming again?
Who?
Your uncle.
Wow. Oh, my uncle. We'll see. I don't know yet. I have written to myself. We have not scheduled yet, but yes, he is part of the plan for the future.
There's a question I have for him actually.
Okay, so you can send me and I'll forward it to him. Right.
Yeah.
Bye-bye, guys.
Shalom. Shalom.
Thank you.